What happens when a relentless prosecutor mocks a woman praying in the courtroom? Minutes later, something shocked everyone in the room, a miracle of the Virgin Mary that no one can explain to this day. But before we continue, leave a comment saying where you are watching from and what time it is there right now. I would love to see how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary are reaching. Robert Dawson was 52 years old and had a reputation that made defense attorneys tremble. 28 years as a prosecutor in Boston, 153 cases won, 0 losses. You know that type of person who transforms a room just by walking into it, who makes silence weigh more than words. Robert was exactly like that. When he stood up in court, his presence filled every inch of the space. Perfectly tailored suits, ties that cost more than many people's monthly rent. And those gray eyes, cold as steel, piercing through any witness. He didn't just win cases. He crushed them. He built narratives so perfect, so inevitable, that the verdict felt like a mere formality. But there was a price for all that perfection. His wife, Amanda, had passed away 8 years earlier, a cerebral aneurysm, no warning. One morning she was laughing at something he had said. 3 hours later, she was gone. Robert didn't cry at the funeral. He accepted condolences with a firm handshake, returned to work the following Monday, and never mentioned her name again. People thought he had moved on, that he had gone forward. But have you ever tried to move on when a part of you died too? When every empty room in the house screams louder than any voice? Robert replaced pain with work. More and more complex cases, longer and longer hours, colder and colder victories, and something inside him hardened, like concrete setting, first malleable, then solid, then impossible to break. Over the past 3 months, Robert had been feeling chest pains. They weren't constant, they came in waves, a strange pressure that made him stop whatever he was doing and take a deep breath. He ignored it. He always ignored it. It was March 2023. Boston was in that strange period between winter and spring, when you wake up not knowing whether you'll need a coat or not. Robert was leading the most important case of the quarter, the case against Jennifer Walsh, a 41-year-old woman accused of financial manipulation that had devastated dozens of small investors. The evidence was solid. Signed documents, transfers, everything seemed to fit perfectly. In Robert's opinion, it was the easiest case of the year. The courtroom was packed that Tuesday morning, people eager to see justice served. The jury that had spent 2 weeks listening to the case. Robert watched Jennifer sitting beside her defense attorney, a young man who had done his best, but who clearly knew he was losing. But something else caught his attention. In her hands, resting on her lap, was a rosary. It wasn't new. The beads were dark wood, worn smooth by use. The small crucifix shimmered slightly under the fluorescent courtroom lights. Robert felt something he couldn't fully identify. Irritation? Contempt? People always brought religious symbols into the courtroom. As if God would nullify evidence, as if faith were a legal defense. The judge struck the gavel. We'll take a 15-minute recess before closing arguments. Court is adjourned. People began to stand. Low conversations filled the room. The judge disappeared through the back. The jury filed out in a line. But Jennifer didn't move. She remained seated, the rosary now in her hands, eyes closed. Her lips moved silently. Robert was putting away his documents when he noticed. Some people had stepped out into the hallway. Lawyers were talking near the door. But there, right in the middle of the courtroom, Jennifer Walsh was praying. You know that feeling when something irritates you out of proportion? When you can't explain why you're so bothered? Robert felt it. He picked up his briefcase, adjusted his tie, and deliberately walked to where Jennifer was. His footsteps echoed through the nearly empty courtroom. She opened her eyes when she sensed someone standing in front of her. Robert looked down at her, his expression perfectly controlled, cold, calculated. And then he said, loudly enough for the few people still in the room to hear. "The Virgin Mary cannot help you here, Mrs. Walsh. Only evidence matters, and the evidence says you are guilty." The silence that fell over the room was absolute. Jennifer looked at him for a long moment. Not with anger, not with fear. With something Robert could not identify, she did not respond. She simply gripped the rosary more tightly and closed her eyes again. Robert gave a cold smile and walked away, satisfied. People avoided looking at him, uncomfortable, but Robert did not care. He had done what he wanted, to show that there was no room for sentimentality in his courtroom. 15 minutes later, everyone was back. The judge returned. The jury took their seats. The room was filled with expectant silence. "Mr. Dawson," the judge said, "are you ready for your closing arguments?" Robert stood up, adjusting his suit jacket. This was his favorite moment, the culmination of weeks of work. The moment to tie all the threads into a perfect and inescapable narrative. He walked to stand before the jury, 12 faces looking at him with complete attention. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice clear and authoritative, "over the past 2 weeks you have heard..." And then it happened, the pain. But it was not like the other times. It was not that uncomfortable pressure that came and went. It was as if someone had driven a knife into the center of his chest and was twisting it. Robert stopped speaking in the middle of the sentence. His hand instinctively went to his chest. "Mr. Dawson?" The judge's voice sounded distant. Robert tried to breathe, but the air would not come in properly. The room began to spin slightly. Cold sweat broke out across his forehead. He took a step back, trying to steady himself, and then the pain exploded. Robert collapsed, not gracefully, not slowly. He simply fell, his body hitting the hard courtroom floor with an impact that made people scream. Absolute chaos. "Someone call an ambulance. He's having a heart attack. Doctor, is there a doctor here?" People running, screaming, total confusion. Robert was on the floor, the pain so intense he could barely think, his vision darkening at the edges. He could hear voices, but they sounded muffled, distant. And then someone knelt beside him. Robert managed to focus on the face for a second. Jennifer Walsh. She had run from the defense table. Now she was there, kneeling on the cold courtroom floor, holding something in her hands, the wooden rosary. "No," Robert tried to say, but no sound came out. His hand tried to push her away, but it had no strength at all. Jennifer, with surprising gentleness, placed the rosary into Robert's right hand, closing his fingers around the wooden beads. And then she said, her voice low but clear, "The Virgin Mary cares for those who do not know how to ask for help." Robert wanted to drop the rosary. He wanted to throw it away, but his hand did not obey, and that was when he felt it. Warmth. It was not the fever of a body fighting. It was different. It came from the wooden beads, spreading through the palm of his hand, traveling up his arm. Real. Physical. Impossible to deny. His breathing, which had been coming in short, desperate gasps, began to calm slightly. Just a little. The darkness at the edges of his vision receded a few inches. Paramedics entered the room, stretcher, equipment, professional voices cutting through the chaos. "Sir, can you hear me? We're going to lift you. Stay calm. We need to go now." They placed him on the stretcher with trained efficiency. Robert felt the pain throbbing in waves, but that strange warmth in his hand was still there. He was still holding the rosary. Inside the ambulance, sirens wailing, Robert kept his eyes half closed. The pain was still there, heavy, but something had changed. And then he felt it, the scent of roses. Fresh, sweet, delicate, filling the moving ambulance completely. Impossible. There were no flowers there, only metal, medical equipment. But the scent was there, undeniable. And Robert, even through the pain, the confusion, and the fear of dying, felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Peace. A deep and completely inexplicable peace spread through his chest, strangely coexisting with the physical pain that was still throbbing. At the hospital, everything moved fast. Doctors, nurses, beeping machines. Robert was taken straight to emergency tests. Dr. Patricia Morrison, the chief cardiologist, came to speak with him hours later. She had 23 years of experience. She had seen hundreds of cases. But when she looked at Robert's test results, she remained silent for several long seconds. 2 days later, when Robert woke up in the ICU, she came to visit him. She pulled up a chair and looked at him with an expression he couldn't decipher. "Mr. Dawson," she began, choosing her words carefully, "I need to be completely honest. Based on the tests we ran, you should not be alive." Robert looked at her, still weak. "The results show that it was extremely serious. I can't explain how you arrived here conscious, nor how you're awake right now talking to me." She paused, looking again at the chart as if searching for an answer that wasn't there. "So you're saying I'll be fine?" Robert asked, his voice hoarse. "I'm saying that you were lucky, very lucky, and that you're going to need to make serious changes in your life." In the following weeks, Robert stayed home recovering. Colleagues called. Messages wishing him well arrived. But Robert barely paid attention because he couldn't stop thinking about the Jennifer Walsh case. At night, when he should have been sleeping, his mind returned to the details, the evidence, the documents, the testimonies. Something didn't quite fit, but he couldn't identify what. Have you ever had that feeling of missing something obvious, like a name on the tip of your tongue that just won't come? Robert began to suffer from insomnia. He woke up at 3 a.m, sweating, fragmented thoughts about dates and signatures racing through his mind. One night, 5 weeks after the heart attack, he couldn't take it anymore. He got out of bed, against medical orders for rest, went to the office, turned on the computer, opened the Walsh case files, and started reading. Everything, from the beginning. Every document, every testimony, every transaction. Hours passed. The sun rose. Robert didn't stop. And then he saw it. A date. In one specific document. The date was wrong. He checked again. Cross-referenced it with other documents, with testimonies, with records. His blood ran cold. He grabbed the phone, called Daniel Torres, his investigator for 12 years. "Daniel, it's me. I need you to check something. Urgently." "Robert, it's 7 a.m. and you should be resting." "Daniel, I need you to investigate Michael Bradford, Jennifer's partner in the company." Silence. "Robert, the case, the jury never reached a verdict because of what happened, but just do it, please." It took 4 days, 4 days of Daniel investigating with help from the internal department, asking questions, checking records. When he called back, his voice was tense. "Robert, you need to hear this sitting down. The evidence had been manipulated." Not all of them, but the crucial ones, the ones Robert had used as pillars of the accusation. Michael Bradford, the partner who had testified against Jennifer, was the real one responsible. He had engineered the entire scheme, and when the authorities began to investigate, he planted evidence incriminating Jennifer, altered documents, signatures on impossible dates. And Robert had believed everything. He had built a perfect case based on carefully crafted lies. Jennifer Walsh was innocent. Robert remained silent for long minutes, processing, recalculating, understanding. If he had finished those closing arguments that day, if he had convinced the jury, Jennifer would be in prison now, an innocent woman, life destroyed, all because Robert was too good at his job, because he never questioned his own certainties. That night, alone in the empty house, Robert held the wooden rosary he now carried in his pocket. And for the first time in 8 years, since Amanda's funeral, Robert Dawson cried. He cried for Jennifer. For almost destroying the life of an innocent woman, he cried for Amanda. For never having properly processed the loss. He cried for himself, for the cold man he had become. And as he cried, he held the rosary, the same beads Jennifer had placed in his hand. The Virgin Mary takes care of those who do not know how to ask for help. That was what she had said, and Robert finally understood. He knelt there on the floor of the empty living room, and for the first time in decades, he tried to pray. He didn't know the right words. He didn't remember the prayers. So he just spoke, honest and broken. I don't know how to do this, but thank you for giving me the chance to see the truth. For Amanda, for Jennifer, for everything. 2 weeks later, there was a special hearing. The courtroom was full again, people wanting to understand what was happening. And Jennifer, seated with her attorney, her face showing cautious hope. Robert entered thinner, still pale, but there was something different in his eyes, something softer. For 2 hours, Robert methodically dismantled the case he himself had built. He showed the inconsistencies, the impossible dates, the altered documents. He presented evidence that Michael Bradford was the real culprit, that he had manipulated everything, that he had testified falsely against his partner. The silence in the room was absolute. The decision was unanimous. All charges against Jennifer were dropped. She was declared innocent, and Michael Bradford was arrested that same afternoon. When the hearing ended, Jennifer approached Robert slowly. They looked at each other in silence. "Thank you," she said. Robert shook his head. "I almost destroyed your life." "But you didn't," she smiled gently. "She took care of both of us that day." Robert took the rosary from his pocket, extending his hand to return it. Jennifer closed his fingers around the beads. "Keep it. You need it more than I do." 6 months had passed. Robert had begun attending a small church on Sundays for the first time in 8 years since Amanda left. And every morning Robert picked up the wooden rosary. He held it for a moment and whispered, "Thank you, Virgin Mary, for giving me a second chance." He didn't know if anyone was listening, but that no longer mattered, because Robert Dawson had learned something that 28 years of victories had never taught him. Sometimes the greatest miracle is not having all the answers. It is having the humility to admit when you are wrong, and the courage to do what is right, even when it costs everything. Before I finish, I want to invite you to be part of our prayer community for the Virgin Mary, a space of faith and hope where people from all over the world come together to pray and share the graces they have received. If you feel in your heart the desire to be part of this chain of prayer, click below and become a member of the channel today, and come pray with us. And look, if you made it this far, all the way to the end of Robert's story, do one thing for me. Write in the comments, "Wooden Rosary," the object that saved 2 lives in that courtroom. I want to see how many hearts this story truly reached, and every time I read those words, I will know that one more person believes that miracles of the Virgin Mary still happen. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. Write in the comments about a miracle you have already witnessed, and share this video with someone who needs to renew their hope today. May the Virgin Mary continue blessing and protecting you and your family. Amen.